What if I told you that two countries who were once best friends are now locked in a 70-year Cold War that shapes everything from oil prices to global security? Picture this: Tehran, 1950s. American advisors walk the streets. Iranian students study in U.S. universities. The Shah shakes hands with presidents. Fast forward to today: sanctions, cyber attacks, proxy conflicts, and nuclear standoffs. So what happened? How did allies become adversaries? And why does this rivalry still matter to you? Stick around, because in the next 15 minutes, we are breaking down the Iran versus USA story like you have never heard it before. No bias, no fluff, just the real history, the hidden turning points, and the human stories behind the headlines. This is not your typical politics video. This is the full story. Let us dive in. Two nations, 7 decades of shifting alliances, deep mistrust, and global consequences. Iran and the United States are not just lines on a map. They are central players in a story that has reshaped the Middle East, influenced global markets, and touched millions of lives. But how did two countries that once stood as close allies become one of the most tense and complex rivalries of the modern era? And more importantly, is there any realistic path forward? Today we are diving deep into the Iran-America relationship, separating fact from fiction, and exploring what really drives this dynamic. This is not about picking sides. It is about understanding history, context, and the human stories behind the headlines. Before we begin, it is important to remember that this relationship is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It is shaped by geopolitics, domestic politics, historical trauma, missed opportunities, and millions of ordinary people who simply want stability. Perspectives vary widely within both countries, and we will acknowledge that throughout. So let us walk through the historical roots, the breaking point, decades of tension and diplomacy, recent developments, and finally the human element that often gets lost in the noise. Let us begin. To understand today, we have to go back to the early 1950s. In 1953, Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, moved to nationalize the country's oil industry, which had long been controlled by British interests. The British, unwilling to lose their economic foothold, turned to Washington for help. Together, the United States and Britain orchestrated a covert operation known as Operation Ajax. The campaign successfully overthrew Mossadegh and reinstated the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, to the throne. Over the next 2 decades, the Shah aligned Iran closely with the West. He pushed forward rapid modernization, expanded education, built infrastructure, and positioned Iran as a regional stabilizer during the Cold War. But his rule also grew increasingly authoritarian. The secret police, known as Savak, cracked down on political dissent, while wealth inequality, cultural shifts, and foreign influence fueled public anger. By the late 1970s, a powerful wave of protests, strikes, and anti-monarchy sentiment swept across Iran. In 1979, the Shah fled the country, and Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile. Iran transformed into an Islamic republic with a strong anti-Western stance. For many Iranians, the revolution was about sovereignty, dignity, and independence from foreign interference. For Washington, it meant losing a key Cold War ally in a strategically vital region. That moment planted a deep seed of distrust that would shape decades to come. Just months after the revolution, on November 4, 1979, Iranian students seized the United States Embassy in Tehran. They held 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage for 444 days. The crisis completely severed diplomatic ties between the two nations, ties that have never been fully restored to this day. Why did it happen? Revolutionary fervor, fear of another American-backed coup, and demands for the Shah's extradition all played a role. The hostage crisis became a defining trauma for both nations. In America, it fueled a narrative of Iranian hostility and unpredictability. It shaped American politics for years and changed how the United States viewed security and diplomacy. In Iran, it cemented the United States as an imperialist threat that could never be trusted. Then came the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988. When Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, the United States, fearing the spread of Iran's revolutionary ideology, tilted heavily toward Iraq. Washington provided intelligence, economic support, and at times turned a blind eye to Iraq's use of chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and civilians. In 1988, the United States Navy shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 people on board. The U.S. called it a tragic mistake during a tense naval engagement. Iran called it a deliberate act of war. The event deepened Iranian resentment, hardened political factions on both sides, and became a lasting symbol of grievance in Iranian political memory. Decades of economic sanctions began, isolating Iran's economy, restricting its access to global markets, and embedding a cycle of suspicion that would prove incredibly difficult to break. Through the 1990s and 2000s, the relationship swung between confrontation and cautious outreach. Iran's nuclear program, initially developed for civilian energy purposes, raised serious international concerns after hidden facilities were exposed in 2002. In 2003, the United States labeled Iran part of an axis of evil, escalating tensions further. Diplomatic channels narrowed, sanctions tightened, and the two nations operated on opposite sides of multiple regional conflicts. But diplomacy was never completely dead. Secret back-channel talks, Swiss intermediaries, and mounting economic pressure that crippled Iran's currency and oil exports eventually created a window for negotiation. In 2015, after years of complex talks involving multiple world powers, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran Nuclear Deal, or JCPOA, was signed. Under the agreement, Iran agreed to significantly limit its nuclear program, allow international inspectors full access, and reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium. In return, harsh international sanctions were lifted, and Iran regained access to frozen assets in global trade. The deal was hailed as a major diplomatic victory by many, but it was also heavily criticized. In Iran, hardliners argued it did not bring enough economic relief. In the United States, opponents argued it failed to address Iran's ballistic missile program and its influence across the Middle East. Still, for several years, the agreement worked. International inspectors confirmed that Iran's nuclear program was verifiably constrained, and regional tensions cooled. Diplomatic channels reopened, and for a brief period, it seemed that a new era of managed engagement might be possible. That stability changed in 2018 when the United States withdrew from the nuclear deal, citing its perceived weaknesses, and reinstated a maximum pressure sanctions campaign. Iran responded by gradually exceeding the nuclear limits set by the deal, arguing that without economic benefits, it had no reason to comply. Diplomatic talks stalled, restarted, and stalled again under different administrations. Since then, the relationship has been shaped by regional conflicts, maritime incidents, cyber operations, and shifting global alliances. Iran has deepened military and economic ties with Russia and China, while the United States has reinforced partnerships with Gulf allies in Israel. Yet behind closed doors, indirect negotiations, prisoner exchanges, and de-escalation efforts have continued, often mediated by countries like Oman, Qatar, and Switzerland. Economically, the sanctions have heavily impacted Iran's middle class, driving inflation, limiting imports, and pushing many toward informal markets. At the same time, global supply chains and American businesses have felt ripple effects from restricted energy markets and financial uncertainty. Militarily, both sides have carefully avoided direct, full-scale conflict, recognizing the catastrophic human and economic costs it would bring. Politically, leadership transitions in both Washington and Tehran continue to shape whether the two nations choose confrontation or calibrated engagement. The relationship today is not defined by open war or lasting peace. It is defined by strategic limbo, managed hostility, and the constant search for leverage. Both sides test boundaries, both sides manage risk, and both sides calculate that total confrontation would be far more damaging than uneasy coexistence. Behind the political headlines and diplomatic maneuvers are millions of Iranians and Americans who do not fit the official narrative. Over 1 million Iranian Americans live, work, and contribute across the United States, bridging cultures in science, medicine, arts, and business. Iranian students, academics, filmmakers, and entrepreneurs maintain quiet but powerful connections through universities, technology, and cultural exchange. Sports, literature, music, and cuisine have traveled across borders long before diplomats could find common ground. Media coverage often flattens both societies into simple stereotypes. In reality, Iran has a young, highly educated, and digitally connected population with a wide spectrum of political views. America has a deeply divided but active foreign policy debate that ranges from interventionism to diplomatic restraint. When governments clash, people still find ways to connect. Academic collaborations, diaspora communities, humanitarian initiatives, and cultural festivals continue to operate beneath the surface of political tension. History shows that when diplomacy aligns with public interest, progress is always possible. People-to-people relationships do not erase geopolitical differences, but they keep channels open when official doors close. The Iran-United States relationship is not a zero-sum game. It is a complex web of historical memory, strategic interests, economic reality, and human resilience. Understanding it means recognizing that both nations have made decisions driven by security, pride, and political survival. There is no shortcut to rebuilding trust, but there is a path forward through verified agreements, consistent diplomacy, regional de-escalation, and sustained cultural and academic exchange. The alternative is not victory, it is perpetual uncertainty. If you found this breakdown helpful, please subscribe for more deep dives into global history and geopolitics. Share your thoughts in the comments, and always remember to look beyond the headlines.